Look, I opened this jar of rotten baby food, and well, a butterfly came out.
That is funny. That is funny.
Welcome to the Comedians in Elevators podcast. I've got my guest, Eugene Samolin. If that's how I pronounce it, Eugene, say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Keenan. Yes, it is Eugene Samolin. I'm an author from Australia. I actually used to be a jazz musician, and music taught me a lot about rhythm and tone and phrasing, and I carried those skills over into my writing. After being a musician for a little while, the time came for me to be an author. So I enrolled in a creative writing course here in Melbourne in Australia, and I really threw myself into the art of science and writing. And I decided that I wanted to write fiction that blended science and spirituality. It wasn't long after that I was given a vision of the tree of life, and I saw all of humanity connected on the one tree. So that experience really galvanized how I see the world and what I wanted my stories to do. So now I write fiction to entertain, to inspire, yes, but also to help to build a better world for all of humankind. So my stories carry a message about the connections between human beings and about breaking down the walls that divide us, the walls between religions, and also about awakening the spirit that lives inside every single person.
I love it. That's very in line with what I'm, at least my vision as well. When you say tree of life, are you referring to the one like in the Kabbalah?
Yes, what I actually saw was rows of fleshy bodies. I know this might sound weird, but I saw rows of people all in lines of descent, like branches of flesh. And every single person throughout history, from the dawn of history, all the way down to me. And there was light flowing through every single one. It looked like a big tree. So when you actually spread all of the people throughout history back, it looks like a great big tree made up of human beings. And that was what I saw.
Wow, that sounds like the halls of a mentee. Or did you have an NDE in your death experience?
I didn't, but I soon found out that actually that qualifies me to say that I'm a mysticist, because it was a mystical experience and it's completely in line with all these other mystical visions that have happened in the past. I never set out to be a mysticist, but it turned out that after having that vision that actually qualified me to be that. So in my writing, I've got a lot to say about that kind of thing, about Kabbalah and the way that the tree of life fits into Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, all the different kind of faiths. It's a real uniting feature that goes underneath all kinds of religions from all different kinds of traditions across the world.
Well,
Yes.
I love it. So, well, you ready to get started?
Yes, let's go for it.
Okay. Listen, to my regular listeners, I know you don't like when at the beginning of these conversations I ask you to subscribe. None of us like it. I don't like saying it. I don't like it being in here. But it's frustrating. You know what else is frustrating? It's also frustrating when I look in the back end of the YouTube channel and I see that 56% of you that watch frequently haven't yet subscribed. And I know this because I see it in the comments section. You say things like, I didn't know I didn't subscribe. And that's actually what fuels the show. Basically, it's like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask all the time, because it enables us to build and build and build, and we're going for the long term here. Hit the subscribe button and we'll continue to build this show for you. That's my promise. Thank you to all you guys that do subscribe. It means the world to me. So the whole point of the podcast is to compare and contrast the comic versus the comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any joke.
Mm-hmm.
So, Eugene, would you agree that you start as a comic and evolve into a comedian?
Well, I'm not sure actually. I think it could go the other way. I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today, it's a really one of those things where it's two sides of the same coin and it can flip over one way or the other. But I actually wanted to ask you, Christoph, I've watched a couple of your episodes. And I'm curious to ask you, you strike me as someone who lives right on the verge between being a comic and a comedian. So I'd like to know, how do you see yourself? Are you a comic or a comedian?
That's an excellent. I'm gonna answer this question with a yes. I see myself as both, but not in a vague sense. More in the
Mm,
sense that I the transition between introvert and extrovert. And so one argument you can say is that the comedian is not either an extrovert or an introvert, but that they are an internal character versus the comic who uses external references or external
mm,
characters. So that's another
ah,
definition that's actually pretty clean. So I like the transition between them.
mhm.
So so
Fair
sometimes
enough.
people don't sometimes people don't see that. So like I'm a shady spiritual comedian. Some people think, is that what does that even mean? Right? Yeah.
Okay,
A lot
cool.
of people find that funny, and a lot of people are like, that's not my style, and they move on. So
Okay. Well, we all have our own tastes. So as long as you know who you are, I guess that's the main thing. Hey.
absolutely, it makes it much more functional when writing jokes. So ready for the first question?
Yes.
All right, it's about the role of persona in comedy. So how much of a comedian's voice is a character versus the real self?
I think that the comedian's voice is their real self. So a true comedian isn't really acting. A true comedian is being their authentic self. Maybe there's a time early on in a comedian's career when they're just finding their feet, where they might be halfway acting and halfway being their true self. But I think the more refined a comedian comes, the more confident they become in their own skin, then the less separation there is between the act and who they actually truly are. And once you get to that highest avant garde level of comedy, there's probably no longer any separation between the character and the actual comedian themselves. Who they are on stage is the same person that they are off stage. So the line between real life and the act kind of tends to blur, and ultimately it fades away. And the great comedian, I think, will ultimately get to the point where on stage, off stage, it's all the same. They're always just being their true, authentic self and being the comedian that they are.
I like it. Let me throw a curveball at you, Eugene.
Yep.
What if you add time, the sequence, and in particular that it's accelerating, meaning that if you're evolving, right? Say I say from a comic to a comedian, or external to internal, but through that evolutionary process, you're always referencing the past. So even though you're in the present, when you're performing, you're always looking backwards. And so for that
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for that reason, you are actually playing a character.
Hmm. I think that that comes down to authenticity, which I think is something that we're going to talk about in a moment. Is that that's perfectly fine for you to evolve and to reference the past. And I mean, hey, since we're talking about dimensions, and I know that you mentioned beforehand, before we did this interview, you were talking about this being a multi-dimensional project. Maybe you're referencing the future as well. Maybe we're not exactly who we are right now. We're who we were in the past, and we're also who we're going to be in the future. Maybe from a higher dimensional perspective, when you're actually looking at who we are, we're not these individual people who are moving through time from one moment to another across an arrow of time. We're actually stretched out across our whole entire life from birth all the way to death. And we're like this creature which is like a branch, which is stretched out across time. And so, what we're doing from our perspective, it seems like we're constantly changing, but in fact, we're just following that movement, that natural flow that leads from the past to the future. And I guess we're trying to do that the best way that we can. Maybe we're making a few adjustments along the way. You know, we're ironing a few things out, ironing out a few crinkles here and there. Maybe we've been here before and we got things a little bit wrong last time. And so that's why we came here this time to get things a little bit better. So, from a multi-dimensional perspective, you know, I guess it throws in a whole different set of viewpoints in order to look at that from.
So I agree with you 100%. If I can throw another curveball, is the way I would phrase it for
Hmm.
myself is that the multidimensional is when you're alone. If you've ever, I'm sure, been isolated in meditation or having your experiences with nobody else around, and that's where the timelessness comes, right? Because you're connected to a higher source that is out of time. But when we interact in the three dimensions like we are right now, that's when the sequence comes in. And that's when we're telling a story or playing a character of the past. It's a character that you also recognize in yourself in your own past. And so that's where I find the relevance of going
Mm.
back and, the character is always of the past because that's the thing we share is this common timeline. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that when we are alone, then we are in a certain way, we're able to access that certain timelessness because we're not interacting with anybody and we're free to simply grow into ourselves and into who we really are. As soon as we start interacting with people, then we enter this timeline or this place where there is interaction, there's mutual reinforcement or not. And we're in this collective space where we go, you're over there, I'm over here, but we're all part of the same tree. So ultimately, what is good for you is good for me. If you look at, for example, a single person and say, I've got my right hand and I've got my left hand, would you allow the right hand to cut off the left hand, or would you allow your left hand to cut off the right hand? That's kind of how it looks from this higher dimensional perspective when one person says, I can't live with you, your way's no good, or, heaven forfend that we should want to kill other people or, wipe these other people out. It's kind of like from a higher dimensional perspective, it's saying my right hand is trying to cut off my left hand, and I'm never going to allow that to happen because, that would be crazy. But for us, it looks like I'm over here, you're over there. We're completely separate people. I'm on the left hand, you're on the right hand. But from a higher dimensional perspective, we're all connected. We're all one. We're all part of the same great big tree. So it's a matter of really getting an idea of that interconnectedness and of saying that we all stem from the same root and that what is good for the one is good for the whole.
Awesome. So speaking of cutting
Beady,
hands
beady,
off,
beady,
how
beady.
about punching up versus punching down, right? So
Yeah.
where do comics versus comedians subscribe to this? And let me put it in some historical context. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
That is funny. That is funny. Um, well, basically, I think that when you are on stage or somebody is on stage and they're saying something that's taboo or that's politically incorrect, then if you're punching up and saying that in a way that aims at people who are higher up, I think most people in the audience would generally be kind of okay with that simply because if you've got power, then you can expect to be scrutinized a fair bit. If somebody's in a high place, then generally you'd think that they should be able to take a bit of a gentle ribbing. But when somebody's punching down, you start to think, hang on a second, this person is already, in a bad place. They've already got it bad enough. Only for this person to come and make it worse for them just to get a kick out of it seems a little bit unethical just to be able to get a laugh out of someone who's already in a bad place. So, yeah, that's my take on that.
Okay. I like it. So how about cultural translation of comedy? So how do jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
Well, different cultures have different tastes, different histories, and those histories generally shape what people find funny, offensive, or sometimes even just completely meaningless. So something that's hilarious in one country could be unfunny in another country because there's no cultural context. There's actually a thing which you've probably heard of, Christoph, which is called ethnocentrism. And this is the idea that people are biased towards the culture that they grew up in, and that your culture feels normal to you. What your parents grew up with, what your grandparents did, that feels like it's just the way that things are for you. You take that for granted and you think that's totally normal. And then when you encounter a different culture, you think, that's really weird. Like, that's really strange that these people behave in this way and that's not normal or that's not funny. But from the other person's point of view, they're looking at you and they're probably thinking the same thing. With globalization, which is pretty big now, I mean, the world is a lot smaller. I'm here in Australia, for example, in Melbourne, and you're there in Los Angeles, in America, and we're having this conversation right now in real time. And this is completely normal now for this to be happening. And in fact, when I was reading your questions for this interview, I was scratching my head and I was going, only in a place like Los Angeles would you get a set of questions like this, because these are really nuanced questions and they surely have come from someone who's really deeply entrenched in the arts, in performance, in film and entertainment. So from your point of view, these questions are probably really normal. But from someone who's outside of LA and probably even outside of America generally, there's a bit of fine tuning that has to happen in order to be able to really understand these questions. So, so basically, I think that, culture, difference, history, ethnocentrism, that's basically what it comes down to.
That's very interesting when you say that. I would say that it's very bifurcated here. We have both an extreme art and kind of higher cultural sense, kind of what you're describing, and the total opposite, where it's just pure greed with an illusion of enlightenment. And so speaking of that, I do have a new pair of questions. Are you game, Eugene? You've never heard this question.
Okay, sure. Go for
Okay,
it.
love and justice. So, is
Mhm.
the highest function of comedy to expose injustice or to make people feel less alone while living with it?
Very interesting question. And I would say that love is definitely on a higher level than justice. They are very closely connected. And love is often quite closely connected to mercy, to the giving, unconditional giving out, unconditional loving, the mercy that extends creation itself, whereas justice can often be quite a severe thing. Justice can often be very harmful, it can be very severe. I would say that love is more important than justice, but once again, you can go too far anyway. A culture where there is all love and no justice will end up, becoming probably too easy to manipulate and corrupt. Whereas if it's all justice and no love, well, it'll just be far too severe and there'd be far less freedom. So I would say, I don't know, maybe 65% love, 35% justice is probably a good ratio.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah.
how about when a joke harms someone unintentionally, does love demand accountability or does justice demand defiance?
I would say that uh, love demands accountability. I would say if it's unintentional,
Yeah.
then intention counts for quite a lot. If you unintentionally hurt somebody, well, maybe you'd be actually then looking at the person who was offended and you'd say, hang on a second, there was no offense intended here. Why are you taking offense? Whereas on the other hand, there'd be times when someone can deliberately try to offend somebody and they'll be like, it's water off a duck's back to me. It means nothing to me. I think a lot of times offense can be taken, not given. So I would say, I would go on the side of love.
Okay, awesome. All right, so very important question.
Mhm,
Advertising and self-promotion. Who
mhm.
advertises themselves more? The comic, the comedian, or the magician? You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
Well, I think that the comic has to advertise themselves more because the comedian is basically already a walking advertisement. Everything that a comedian does is already an ad. They don't need to sell themselves because they are the product. Whereas the comic, on the other hand, has to actually get the word out there and kind of say, hey, everybody, I'm going to be on stage telling jokes and making you laugh, at some time. So therefore, they need to spread the word out there and let people know I'm going to be on stage being funny at this particular time. So promotion becomes more necessary for the comic than it does for the comedian.
Okay. Is that assuming that the comedian is already known and the comic is unknown?
Well, whether they're known or unknown, the fact that the comedian is basically humor in themselves, they are funny, whether or not they're trying to be funny or not. That is kind of like self-promotion in itself. Seeing as though they're always being a comedian, someone would know this person is a comedian. They're a funny person. If they're going to be on stage, then they're going to be being funny. That's what they are, without even really trying to be. So in that way, it's kind of self-promotion. They're always promoting themselves. Anyone that they come across is going to be aware, oh, this person's a comedian. They're really funny. So it might involve less actual advertising that they actually need, whereas a comic may need to tell people, I'm going to be being funny. You should come and see my show and have a laugh.
I can say that sometimes I have to mention it because people get like freaked out. They don't know what's happening right now. Like why is it so out of norm, say at a market or something? And you just naturally make some kind, not even a joke, just the situation itself is just humorous, and you point it out, and people they're like, what? It's not normal. What's happening? I'm like, no, what's happening right now is not normal, and this is why. And they go, oh my God. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. So that does happen sometimes. Okay, speaking of which sometimes I have to censor myself. So how about censorship and defense? So does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point, like a magician?
No, I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that a comic can have a certain shtick, if you will, that they're going out to try to offend people, that they're going out and they're saying, I'm going to make a joke about this person, I'm going to make a joke about that person. My material is going to be generally offensive, and that's my way of making people laugh. I've seen plenty of comics who have made their whole act about putting people down, laughing at people. Whereas there are comedians, on the other hand, who might be perfectly willing to laugh at themselves, slapstick humor, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think that.
Okay. All right. So who survives? Oh, what's going on? Okay. Who survives better in a cancel culture environment? The comic, the comedian, the magician, or the mudslinger?
Did you say a cancel culture?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Who survives better? Probably the comedian, because the comedian is more able to improvise and to change up their act and to use whatever they have on hand to be able to adapt to whatever environment they happen to be in.
Okay. Okay. So timing and delivery, is it a science or an art?
I would say that timing and delivery, that basically, okay, artists have good timing, generally speaking, whereas scientists are usually good on delivery. So if you've got perfect timing, but you don't have any good delivery, then people aren't going to laugh. Whereas on the other hand, if you've got perfect delivery, but you haven't got good timing, then it's probably going to go straight over people's heads. So really,
when you say
both.
delivery, are you referring to material?
Yeah, I am referring to material. Yes, material.
Okay.
So I mean, delivery. What's a delivery? A delivery is material, yes. Another way of looking at it is something that gets delivered. So something that gets delivered to your front doorstep, for example. You might get exactly what you wanted to get delivered. I don't know. You got McDonald's delivered to your front door. Oh, but I just ate something. The timing wasn't any good. So that's another way of looking at it in timing and delivery. So yeah, the thing about it though is if you want to get really philosophical about this, you could say if you follow delivery and timing to their extremes, they probably both start to merge. It's like art and science. At which point does science become art and art becomes science? There's a point at which they merge and they become almost like the same thing. The artist ends up becoming like a scientist, and a scientist ends up becoming like an artist once you take them to their extreme. And so I think it's the same with timing and delivery. At the highest level, they converge into the same thing.
It reminds me of this real life event. I'm just going to have to mention it because it is a true example, I think, of timing and delivery in the sense that you said. I was working at a car dealership and we ordered chicken salad from a restaurant that's 20 miles away. So on DoorDash, it's got a certain delivery fee. The guy that picked up the order was on a bicycle, not a motorcycle, but that's what he put. That's what he put when he set up his account, that he was on, well, two wheels, but it wasn't motorized. So by the time the salad came at 100 degrees, by the way, it was a soggy mess. And all I could do was tip him extra. And it was the most absurd experience ever. And of course, we wouldn't eat it.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
that I think is a real life example. I should make a joke out of that, but I just threw it out there and see just the reality of
Well,
it.
that's a funny situation as it
Very
is
much.
already. So it's close to being a joke already.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I had to make light of it at the moment. So let's ask a real one then. So how about comedy as commentary? So when does a comedian cross into being a philosopher or a preacher?
I think either a comic or a comedian can be a philosopher or a preacher. They're both definitely capable of that. And I would say that that's when someone has reached the absolute pinnacle of what it is to be a funny person, where they're no longer simply trying to entertain or tell jokes or make people laugh, but they're genuinely making a difference to the world. They genuinely have something to say. And it might be philosophical, it might be religious, it might be spiritual, it might be political, but if they're actually turning their funny talk into something that makes a difference culturally, then you can say this is a person who has definitely been called to make things funny. And, there have been plenty of comics or comedians who have actually imparted a way of thinking, a philosophy, or even a way of living. And you kind of look at those guys and you think, wow, this is what they were meant to do. And that's something that I definitely have a lot of respect for.
So I did just to finish that non-joke is I did offer him a zero down to buy a car when he did arrive at the dealership. So there's the at least I finished the bad joke. All right. So Eugene, are you ready to enter the multiverse?
The multiverse.
Yes. Are you ready for it?
Yes, I'm
Uh,
ready.
All right. So board game Zoomcast, play versus performance. So if comedy were a board game Zoomcast, are you competing as the colorist, adding tone, mood, and shading, or the Foley artist, building punchlines with soundscapes and timing?
Well, I would say the second one. I'd say you're building the timing, the soundscapes. You're putting in the actual input which is needed in order for them to actually deliver on what they need to do.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
so does comedy work better when it's painted vividly or when it's orchestrated sonically?
I would say comedy works better when it's painted vividly. That's my preference. I prefer more on the artistic, cultural kind of depth of character kind of side. So, yeah, I would say when it is painted, like you said.
Awesome.
Yes.
Oh, and also we're going to take in his bicycle for a trade-in as if it had 4 wheels instead of 2. All right. So here on the Comedians and Elevators podcast, we have a tradition where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest. And the previous guest was Kristen Reinbold. And her question for you, Eugene, is, would you consider yourself funny? And how old were you when you discovered yourself as funny?
Yes, I would consider myself funny, and probably more on the comedian side. Just being funny, generally speaking, as opposed to kind of telling structured jokes. And I guess when did I see this as being a fact? Probably only quite recently, actually. I found that, making people laugh is a really good way to make them feel comfortable. Laughter is often the best medicine. And actually, I've realized that when I get stressed out or when I get nervous or when something that's, hurtful or something like that occurs, my reaction is generally to laugh about it. So it's probably when that happened and I found myself laughing despite being put in some really trying situations, that I think that means that I use humor as a coping mechanism. And hey, sometimes that made other people laugh as well. So that's what I think about that.
All right. Very cool. Oh, and by the way, I was also going to personally reinstall the child seat he had on his bicycle into his new car when he got it. All right. Last question. Last question. Legacy. Who gets remembered? Will the comics Tight Five survive time, or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
My answer is that the comedian would be the more timeless one. And that's because with the comic, you tend to remember the jokes more than the person. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. That's a comic's joke. And we don't know, I don't think anybody knows who the first person to tell that joke was, but the joke has survived the test of time. The comedian, on the other hand, doesn't even necessarily have to say anything. You could just look at a picture of a comedian or even a slow motion reel or something like that, and you start to smile, you start to chuckle, you start to go, oh yeah, I know that person, they're really funny. So I think that the comedian generally has this aura about them that makes you remember them over a long period of time, even when you no longer remember what it was that they said that was funny. The comic, on the other hand, their jokes seem to be the thing that actually stands the test of time. And even after you've forgotten the comic themselves, you still remember the joke.
That's right, because it probably was the chicken that told that joke, but we'll never know. All right, Eugene, where can everybody find you online?
EugeneSamolin.blog. That's where you can find me. You'll find my blog there. You'll find a testimony of the vision that I had or was given of the Tree of Life, some articles, some flash fiction, and you can subscribe, obviously. And I've also got a novel and a pamphlet, which I've also published. So if you check out on the blog, it will all be there.
Awesome. Well, Eugene, thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for tolerating me trying to write a joke in real time. And for everyone,
well done. You got there eventually. I think you've got a full joke now.
I have enough material to parse something out of it. So, and also I'd like to thank everyone. So please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. If you're interested in too much information like in the network state or Mantipus the chicken shit, check out this video. Or is it this one right here? Well, either way. Lizard.